Welcome to another Airbrush Asylum video. In this video we're going to show you how to paint this Evil Jester. It's going to be spread over a few different parts, so we're going to start with part 1 where we're going to show you how to do the white underpainting. The image that you just saw was the sketch that I did of the Jester. You can see here I've got a transparency on the left which I have gone over with overhead projection marker, and then I've put that on a light box and put some brown paper over it and used a chalk pencil to draw on the back of it. Then I've flipped it back over and now I'm tracing over the top, which will in turn press the chalk down, much like carbon paper works, and that chalk then gets transferred onto my aluminium composite panel, which you can see here. The aluminium composite panels that I use are from sign supply shops. I get asked quite a bit where you get them from, so check with your local sign supplier. They should be able to help you. If you want to know how to prep them properly, in a lot of my videos I use these panels, so just watch pretty much any of my other videos and it'll show you how to go about prepping it. Alright, so we're all ready to paint. The artwork was, as I said, chalked on, so you can do that with numerous different artworks, and also these tips that you're going to see in this video, they're going to help you to create any artwork on a black background. So you've probably seen, if you've seen any of my videos, you've probably seen me using this method before, so this will just be a little bit of a modification for this particular artwork, but it will at least give you some tips on how to create other styles on the same sort of surface. So what I'm using here in my CMC Plus airbrush is white paint. So it's a base coat white, and I've just thinned it out so that it'll run nicely through my airbrush, which runs a 0.23mm needle. And what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to use the white to create that white underpainting. So when I say white underpainting, I mean it's a base for all the other colours to sit on. Now in this particular artwork we're doing this in a black and white, so just using different strengths of black to create the artwork with some white highlights. If you were to do colour and you wanted to do this image in full colour, then you still would do this same step, so that you basically have your base coat first and then you'll bring your colour over the top of that and then detail from there. Okay, so this is still going to be really helpful for building up your tones, and you can also build up your textures as you go. So throughout this video we're going to show you certain parts of the artwork in real time, but we're also going to speed up some of the sections just to keep the artwork moving along and the video staying a bit more interesting. Alright, so hopefully you'll still be able to pick up a lot of tips out of this and apply these tips to whatever artwork you're creating. So I've started with the nose of the Jester, just using my white. Now the idea of just using the white is you virtually use it as if it's the only tone that you're going to use to create your artwork. That way, instead of just flat toning all the artwork, you've already got, you're starting to build your foundations, your textures, all those sort of areas are getting built up, as well as your finer details, and they will show through later in the artwork. So keep that in mind. Even if you were to put colour over the top, a lot of airbrush paints have transparent colours, so when you lay a transparent over something like this where the white has been built up and there's some textures, you will see that through the colour. So that's why we do it like this rather than just masking it out, spraying it one colour and then moving on from there. So you can see I'm holding the airbrush with both hands. On my left hand I've got a glove, so a lot of the time I will wear a glove, especially with automotive artworks that I'm doing, so that way we don't get any contaminants from my skin on the panel, and then that may show up when you clear coat it later. So that allows me to, I can rest on the panel and not worry about that, so that's why I wear the glove. I'm reasonably close with my airbrush and you can see my trigger fingers just going back and forth, back and forth. Now the key is you've got to keep the air on all the time. So for beginners this is probably not the easiest artwork to try and achieve, but the idea is just to show you this particular artwork which we created, and hopefully you can use some of the tips and tricks that you learn in this video to apply and create your own artworks. So moving along, we're still working on the eye section of the Jester. You can see the nose, he's got some straps that are going around, just a bit more twisted looking, so little things like that we just threw in here. So I've picked a bit of a light source. The light source is the top right, so we're just going to work with that and keep that in mind when we're painting. It's not extremely crucial at this stage because this is just the underpainting, so we've got a lot of layers to put on top of this, but at least it'll give us a bit of an understanding of where we want the brighter areas. So depending on which side or whereabouts you pick the light source, just keep that in the back of your head when you're painting and try and allow for that. So you can use obviously the black panel to your advantage by leaving some of it not as bright and not as covered with the white paint. That will then give you the illusion of a shadow already. So that's another reason why I like painting on black and using these methods, because it just gives you an idea of how the artwork's going to look as a finished piece. So just working on those teeth there. You can see I'm reasonably close with the airbrush. Every time I'm moving the airbrush up and down, I'm pulling back on the trigger. So you don't want to hold the trigger and pull back on it to allow for paint to come out and then move, because you'll start to get blotches or you'll get heavier sections. So keep that in mind when you're painting. So I'm leaving a gap between the teeth just so that you can make them out, and then I'll start working on the gums as well. But just take your time, try and add in as much as you can. So just blending under that nose there, creating the top of the lip and the gum there. And then I'll start mapping in all the lower teeth. So maybe if you want to do something similar to this but use the same methods and the same toning, I'd recommend get a reference and then work off that, because this is just a sketch. So this is one that we made up ourselves, and that makes it a little bit harder to render it. So if you're still learning how to airbrush, by all means use the steps that we're showing you in this video, but get yourself around something that you can work towards. That way you've got all your light sources and everything's there, so you can just focus a bit more on practicing your airbrushing. So just working under those teeth now, the bottom gum. You can see my airbrush is moving in and out, so I'm doing up really close for all the fine stuff and then further away just to create the blends. So keep working in the detail. If you get a little bit of overspray here and there, it doesn't really matter. You're still in a fairly safe part of the artwork, which is the centerpiece there. When you start doing the outside bits and the hat, that's when you've got to watch the overspray a little bit. But we are going to put a background on this, so I'm not too concerned about that. If we get a little bit of overspray, that'll be hidden. So you can see this part's just been sped up because I showed you some real-time footage of how we created the teeth and the eyes. So every now and then we'll speed up a section just to keep the video moving along and just so you guys don't get bored. So just adding some more highlights in there, just popping sections out and putting some detail in. It's a bit hard to see from this camera angle, just thought I'd show you some from a distance, and then we'll zoom back in a minute to show you as well how I detail some of the areas. So keep in mind this is just the underpainting, so this is part one to this Evil Jester video series. So as we do some of the other tones, like the other thinned out blacks that we're going to use to create the artwork, you'll see more and more detail being formed. So I'm just working on the Jester's hat there. You can see the ends of, instead of having the traditional sort of bells on the ends, I've replaced them with some skulls. So I thought that was a little bit more appropriate and a bit cooler. So working on the teeth now. So you can see just coming in. Again, this angle's not the best, but at least you get an understanding. We'll zoom in a minute. Just putting some stitching in as well. You can see I'm steadying my airbrush with both hands. I kind of lock in my elbows as well, just so that I don't get as much movement through my body. So that helps to sort of keep it all tighter. You can see there's a bit of overspray building there. That angle gives you a bit of a better, clearer look. So I'm just going to put a bit of almost like a checkered flag pattern in the base of the Jester's hat there. Thought we'd put that in rather than just having a basic colour or having it either black or white. I just thought a bit of a pattern would look kind of cool. So just building up those squares. Just airbrushing one in, so that's white, and leaving the one next to it the panel colour, which is black. So you can see I'm close, but I mean, if I wanted it to be super duper detailed at this stage, I'd be right up, almost touching the panel. But again, as I mentioned earlier, this is just the underpainting, so we just want to build up some toning on there and give us a bit of a reference point that we can work off as we create the artwork. So we're still adding in all of the detail, just not all the finer bits and pieces that we're going to put in a bit later, but at least we've got a really good foundation to build on. So again, doing the stitching, moving up towards the top there. Just adding a bit more, finishing off that skull there. You can see blending it out. So when you're doing skulls, try not to just spray them and have them looking too flat. You want to add in all your textures and bits and pieces. You can see there how the highlight, and there's a darker sort of shade down the center of his head there. So little things like that also help to make it look a bit more three-dimensional rather than just a flat, solid colored skull. So working on the other areas of the Jester's hat, doing a bit more of the stitching. So you can see the tops of them, of the separate pieces of the hat, are a bit brighter because that's where our light source is coming from. You can see I'm opening up the trigger there quite a bit and just building up all those blends. Again, getting a bit overspray, but not too concerned about that. Putting some creases in as well, just to make it look like fabric. Just keep building the white. So obviously any areas you want brighter, just keep coating it. Again, I don't hit an area straight off the bat, like full coverage. So I build it up. You can see my distance of the airbrush is going in and out, in and out. So I'm up close with some of the detail and then further away. So just adding in more detail there, defining the other areas of the Jester's hat, blending that out just so my highlight and the base colour covers that whole area. You can see how I pretty much outline with the white as well, just to almost sketch in the design. More of the creases in there. So just keep working each area. And then I'm feathering out from my edge. So doing the line there to control my overspray and then feathering out back into the artwork. So you can see now how that's all coming together. Just working on the final bits of the Jester's hat there. So we're sped up again in this part, just to get the rest of the hat finished there with the white. So finishing off the skulls, these ones are looking towards the back of the panel to help create that 3D element. Just adding another one in there. You can see how easy it is to build them up. Working on another one. So just building up that white and just sketching in all of the design. So just remember, keep your air on all the time and you just pull back on your trigger finger. So obviously when you're up really close doing the finer detailed stuff, don't pull back as much. Otherwise you might get it spidering out on the surface, especially on the aluminium composite panel. It's not very forgiving at all, so it is very much like working on an automotive surface. So just a couple more to go and then we'll finish off this hat and move on to the next part. Just pulling out all the details of this skull. Doing the teeth. Just filling in that head of the skull. And drawing in the bottom of that section of the hat. Adding a bit more detail, brightening up some of the stitching. And then working on the checkers on the other side of the hat there. So up close again to show you a bit more of the detailing above the eye. So you can see it's not just a flat tone, and I've even come back into certain areas and brightened them up a little bit. So anything that's brighter is going to look like it's raised, and then you leave obviously the darker areas to simulate your shadowing. But we still pretty much want a dusting of white over the majority of the artwork, so that way we can really deepen a lot of the shadows. So now just working on the ruffled collar. So each one of these are like tiny little dagger strokes. It's a bit hard to see in the video, but we'll define these a lot more later when we use our mixed blacks, like the different strength black. So I'm kind of just adding the texture of them and creating that sort of half circle dagger line on the top of each one, just to simulate that they are curved. So if you're working on a reference, obviously check that and keep verifying the way that you're going with your artwork so you don't sort of lose it. So just continually working all that in. Again, just sketching with that airbrush. So try not to saturate any area with too much paint, just building it up and taking my time, and also leaving the air on in between, so that helps to dry the paint. So you can see there I pulled back a bit further and that just brightened up that section. Just continually rendering and just building up a base. So adding texture and detailing as I go, not just colouring these in solidly. So you want to build up the tones and you want to still reflect the highlight from the light source, so we want it on the top of each one of those ruffles, and add those dagger type strokes in so that you can get this illusion of the shape. So just continually pulling out all the aspects of the artwork, gradually working my way through, looking back at my sketch while I'm doing it, but also following the chalk lines that we've got. So with the chalk, when I drew it on, I actually put a Intercoat Clear. I sprayed that lightly over the top, so it's completely transparent, but what that does is it just seals in the chalk, so that when you're up close, when you're airbrushing, the air from the airbrush isn't going to blow away your design. So it's a handy little tip, and one that I use quite a bit, so feel free to use that on all your pieces that you've used chalk on. So nearly finished with the ruffles. Then we'll move on to the next part. Just taking my time now, going back, brightening up certain areas. So remember, you can always come back and rework a section. You'll notice I tend to move around quite a bit as well when I'm painting, so I'm adding a bit of the checkered pattern to the end of the glove there, and I'm going to start pulling out part of the glove in a minute. I'll just jump back to the face. As I was just saying, I move around a bit, so you can see that that definitely happens. I think it's just because I'm working on one area and I think, oh, I'll go back there, that needs a little bit more of a highlight, and I'll do it before I forget. So now just bringing that, shaping that glove. So you can see I added the checkers on the bottom there, just for a bit more detail, and then bringing out the highlights on the glove to shape it, up reasonably close with the airbrush, probably 1.5 centimeters or 2 centimeters away, but varying in height. So when I'm dusting from a distance, I'm a bit further, so probably, I don't know, about 5 centimeters, and then up close again 1 centimeter or 1.5 centimeters. So the creases there in the glove, working the thumb. So again, just painting the highlights and then blending them out. So this will just create his hand there. Just build it up, take your time. And we're just going to individually do all the fingers. So I'm painting them in almost 3 sections, so that you can see he's almost wearing like a tight glove, so you can still see the separations in his fingers. So just joining them all up. Another crease, and then bringing that all together as one. If you think you want to add more detail, by all means. You can even get references for each individual piece and then work off that. So now we're going to work on the spring, because I've got this particular jester. I wanted him coming out like almost a jack in the box. just something a bit different. So we're just working a highlight in there to create the spring. Taking our time and being careful to follow the reference and also the chalk drawing. You can see I'm focusing on the highlight on the top of each loop of the spring, just so I've got an understanding and I remember where my light source is. So the lower part would obviously then have a shadow once we get to that stage, but I'm just brightening up on the top of them, of each loop. So working my way down towards the jack-in-the-box part. So just tweaking them as I paint them. So kind of a little bit further away, fogging them in, and then the bright highlight I'll be up closer and I'll brighten that up. So the last part, work that in. And just going to go back quickly and do some final touch-ups on that glove. And now we're working on the skeleton voodoo doll. So starting off with all the nails, all the pins. So each head of the pin. Adding the highlight. And then airbrushing the pin. And moving on to the next one. So you can see I'm reasonably close now, only pulling back a fraction on my trigger finger as I'm moving, which allows me to get a bit finer detail. So all these areas, as well as the skeleton, I'm up reasonably close, just to draw all that in, keep it nice and neat. So just taking my time, and now I'm starting to airbrush a bit of this glove in there. So that's the thumb, which is sitting on top of the skeleton that the jester is holding. Just working down, that's his other arm. Do his little hand. All the individual fingers, you can see really close now. Put the thumb in. And then move on to the other parts of him, just shaping it. So just be careful with all these bits because they're a bit more detailed. That means you just got to be careful when you're up close. You can see just a close-up of the other hand there and doing the bones. And then you can see I just dusted slightly over the dark area, and then we're going to join up the other part from his elbow to his shoulder, and then work on the ribs and finish off the skull itself to give the skeleton a head. So you can see his little eye sockets, his mouth, like his little teeth. So just build all that up. Don't rush it, just take your time. You can turn the pressure down too on your airbrush if you've got one of these Mac valves on the front, So usually with fine detail, I'll thin the paint out and drop the pressure down to about 20 to 25 psi. So that might help you. It might mean that you have to coat it a few more times. However, it'll allow just for that finer detail. So just working the rest of the glove now, just to grabbing hold of that skeleton. So allowing the joins between the fingers, then hitting the tops of them with the highlight to brighten them. So continuing to detail that glove, getting the highlights, popping it out. Establishing all of the fingers. And then moving on to the legs of the skeleton. So just to finish him off. All the leg bones. And then working on the feet in a minute. So leaving the join where the knee is. And now starting to render the jack-in-the-box. So starting at the top of that box there, doing all the highlights and putting a little bit of a dagger stroke and a couple of lines in there just to simulate a bit of the timber sort of look. I want it to look like an old timber box, and it's got some clown motifs on either side as well that are meant to look like they're carved into the box. So just keep rendering that. Adding all the highlights to give all the joins of the timber. Adding a bit of a dust in there of white just to fill that black, and finishing off the feet of the skeleton. So again, up really close for this part and picking out all the individual sections of the feet, the toes, the heel. So these would be the toes now. Almost like two little dots really. It's pretty fine. Doing the other foot and then getting back to rendering that box. Just working all of that in. Just back and forth, brightening up certain areas to make sure that I'm happy with it. Again, going back in, brightening up a couple of those limbs on the skeleton's legs there. And then working back on the jack-in-the-box in a minute. Just finishing off the glove first. You can see there, it's just the glove's been done with a bit of a checkered pattern. Pretty much to simulate what you learnt before from the other glove. And now just coming back in, highlighting this box just to give that timber appearance again. And starting to render everything else on there. We've got some like little latches on the side there. So up close to render those latches with a couple of the screw holes. And we've got some on the outside as well. And then once we finish them, we can start working on the actual clown face. So we're going to hit the opposite edge, which would be the edge that would be picked up by the highlight. So given that our highlights are top right, you can see there I'm working kind of on the sort of left hand side of that of the clown's eyes there, then hitting the top of the nose there, which I've turned into the handle of the jack-in-the-box. So just picking out that highlight and starting to build that artwork on the side of the jack-in-the-box, the clown there. Working on the hair of the clown and the edge of that box, so up close around the edge of the box so I don't get too much overspray, and sort of from a distance with the hair just so it looks a bit softer, and then finishing off around the face, putting in the smile there, same thing, starting with the highlight to pull that out, make it look like it's carved in. We'll be able to do this a bit better later once we work with the darker shades, be able to pull all these details out. So again, like I said, it's just purely to sketch it all in at this stage. Then adding a bit of that white fogging over the top of the clown face, and then moving back in, finishing off the eyes, pulling out that detail, doing the base of the box and working in the collar. And we're nearly getting to the end of this underpainting, which is good. Starting to come to life already. So the nose now, which is the handle of the jack-in-the-box. So again, working with the highlight. You can see getting a bit of overspray, but not too worried about that. As I said, we will be doing a background, so we'll fix that up. So I've nearly done this side of the box, and we're going to move on to the double-headed circus act, which is the double-headed man. Bit of a freak show sort of artwork, which is kind of cool. So he's got a top hat on each head, so just marking that out. Same thing, hitting that highlighted edge, doing the brim of the hat, so up close for those areas. And same thing on the arms, just pulling out those highlights, coming in, working on his body. We're nearly done. Working on the legs there. You can see the overall image too now, which is good. So any artwork that you're thinking of doing, it should somewhat look like this. It should still have a 3D element to it, which is what we're going for. And just keep blending that in. And I think we can pretty much call that done for the first step. You can see I'm just dusting over in certain areas. And there you have it. There's the first step all complete. Make sure you tune into part 2 so that you can see the further detailing of this artwork. Thanks for watching, and if you like our videos, remember to hit subscribe.